Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 31.
30 what? 32? No, 31. 31.
31 episodes.
Yeah.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, Past Lives.
Yes.
A film that I saw a week or two ago. And at the time, I had sort of no real, not desire, but sort of had no plans to sort of discover it in Cineboys to Cinemen. But as the days went on, the film continued to stay with me, and I continued to think about it. And after we drew a blank thinking about a topic after the anime episode, it became apparent to me that it was something I think we had to talk about, really.
Yeah. And I think you said you think I'd like it, and so it kind of inspired me to go out and watch it. Not a lot of screens are showing it anymore. I had to go to like a weird cinema in the middle of like Westbury-on-Trim.
Oh, really?
To go and watch it. Yeah. But it was nice. There was like no one else in the screen. It was like, it's one of those films that it's kind of peppered about the UK.
I think it had like a sort of a brief peak, but I don't think it's held long.
No, I feel like it'll be a movie. I mean, it's A24, isn't it? But it'll be like on a kind of prestige streaming platform of some sort in the next couple of weeks, I imagine. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah,
it definitely has that vibe about it. As it's a sort of doomed romance. Although we use the term loosely in regards to that film, because I don't think it's all sort of doom and gloom in that film necessarily.
No, there's a sort of air of melancholy about it.
Yeah,
but I think you could classify it as such for reasons that we'll get into later.
Yeah,
but I agree with you. Doesn't quite fit the mould, but interesting topic to discuss nonetheless.
Yeah, the doom romance in cinema, which seems to have really sort of run alongside rom-coms and romance films in general as just like another sort of almost subgenre that's popular, if not more so in certain cases.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So we'll look forward to talking about that. We're also going to talk about some of our favourite examples, and then, of course, the film review itself. So
enjoy.
Let's not mess around.
No,
I've messed around long enough.
No, let's stop now.
Come
seriously.
On. Questing the cinematic void. Right then. So if the romance film exists to offer a unrealistic and fanciful view of romance, devoid of any of the complications of the human condition, as a form of escapism,
okay,
the doomed romance, as its name suggests, is sort of the antithesis to that idea.
Okay,
So the whole idea is that, this isn't necessarily about escapism in the sense that, all of the complications and the difficulties and the nuances that definitely sort of like classic romance films tend to ignore are very much present and contribute to a sort of a narrative that is driven very much by those things. And those things become the issues which then, drive the narrative forward. And I was thinking about that idea for quite a long time about that, and I think there are plenty of fantastic examples which we're going to go into. I think it's interesting to note as well, weirdly, like I was thinking about films like the context, like The Notebook.
And
Blue Valentine.
Oh, right, yeah.
Like films that sort of strive for this sort of hyper-real presentation. Maybe not so much The Notebook, but this sort of representation of, the doomed romance. But even that, in a way, has become almost like a sort of fanciful, escapist portrayal.
Yeah, it's heightened in the sense that you get to see them going up the mountain, as it were, but then it also kind of presents it as destined to fail. And obviously that goes all the way back to like Shakespeare, right? So Romeo and Juliet's like the example.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the film. I hate that. I fucking hate that film, by the way. I really don't like that film.
The Baz Luhrmann?
The Baz Luhrmann one.
Oh, really?
I
don't actually mind it, but it's been a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah, I just think I don't think it's aged well. I think it's like the way that the Shakespearean dialogue's done is just stupid, and like the kind of modern with all the, like the TVs and the helicopters and stuff. Like, anyway, side issue.
No.
But no, like that's where that started, like the idea of the tragedy, and what better tragedy, what more kind of almost relatable tragedy, because I think in one way or another we've all kind of been in sort of relationships that are destined to fail, like past relationships and stuff, whether those failures are down to things as kind of operatic as what happens in Romeo and Juliet, or something as simple as they dumped you because you're not as cool as they thought or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it is sort of semi-relatable, I think, and if the two leads who are intertwined with each other have good chemistry, then that only further enhances that kind of relatable idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think there's a sort of distinction to be made within the doomed romance, because I think there is a mainstream appeal to them now, and I think a part of that is the way they present, the way the romance falls apart. So you're right, it starts off all, I'm thinking like Blue Valentine, it sort of starts off and there's that sort of whimsical sort of ukulele or guitar scene in the shop front.
Yeah.
And then it just descends into this sort of basically hour-long shouting match.
It's after Ryan Gosling loses his hair.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
That's when things go south. Well, that is, what I was saying earlier. Like, as he's becoming like less attractive as he gets older, and you as the audience are kind of meant to, I guess, that kind of that sort of masculine grip he'd have on perhaps any audience member in theory, like would be lost as the story gives way to his real tendencies, and like he's quite a heavy drinker in it, isn't he? And that kind of stuff.
I feel like even though that's probably one of the better examples of certainly the more mainstream doomed romance films, it's definitely a film that strays into this sort of exaggerated version of a declining relationship. I think there are parts where it gets a bit sort of soap opera.
Yeah, I agree.
In the English sense, anyway.
Oh, completely. Like the bit where she's marching to her car and she's like, "I want a divorce," that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It does stray. I do love the film. I think it's great. Is it Derek
Cianfrance? Yeah,
Derek Cianfrance. Yeah, I thought it was wicked, but that example is interesting because the relationship is doomed because of the behaviour of the people in question. Where a lot of doomed romances are based on things that are beyond the main character's control, I guess.
Yeah,
so I'm thinking more like something like Atonement, or
okay. God, I didn't think about that.
Never Let Me Go is another one. I've got a list here actually. I've called it honourable because I've got like some main ones I want to discuss, but I've got honourable but ultimately not as good mentions, and then I put in brackets tendency for romantic films in the 2000s to be hopelessly tragic. Maybe like Hangover from Titanic, because obviously Titanic was so ridiculously successful.
Yeah,
but these films always are based on books that when you go into Waterstones and there's that bit in the little tables in the middle. Yeah, and they've got those books on them. Yeah, they're always based on those books.
Yeah,
I think Time Traveler's Wife, again The Notebook, P.S. I Love You. Remember Me, the one with I haven't actually seen it, but there's a bit at the end that has...
It's like Robert Pattinson in it.
Robert Pattinson, 9/11.
9/11, yeah.
The twist is it's September the 11th, yeah. But like, there's... I know, yeah. It's just, I don't know.
It's just a ridiculous twist.
Same decade that 9/11 actually happened as well, that film got released, so there you go. Benjamin Button, another one, like... the other Lake House.
Okay.
The Painted Veil.
Wow, I don't know those two.
Cold Mountain.
Oh yeah, I've seen Cold Mountain.
Cold Mountain. I actually quite like Cold Mountain.
Is that the Civil War?
Yes. Jude Law, Nicole Kidman. But it's that kind of tendency, The English Patient. I actually quite like The English Patient as well.
Yeah.
But it is post-Titanic, right? It's like, I guess studios thought, hang on a minute, we got something here. Like, romances that are doomed to fail because of circumstances beyond the control of the protagonists work. Let's do loads and loads of them, and like let's seek out kind of novels that maybe perhaps previously would have gone like sort of fallen by the wayside. I just thought that was interesting. There was kind of like a tendency,
No, I think that is really interesting because it sort of opens up this idea, the more mainstream doom romances, that there's appeal in having your sort of heartbroken over 2 hours. Like if you're prepared to like envelop yourself in these stories, no matter how trite and overplayed they might be in some cases. There is something about like just longing for that sort of fantasy, fantasy which the romance film that that preceded the doomed romance
always
gives you.
Yes, exactly.
So it almost feels like a stepping stone, like a cultural stepping stone. You sort of go to the romance film for a completely fanciful view of love and relationships.
Yeah.
And you go to the doomed romance to have a completely exaggerated version of things that can never be.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And quite often these films present what could be, but actually what aren't. Like Atonement did that with a film that I didn't mind too much when I saw it, and I don't think time's been too kind to it, but like the twist in spoilers for Atonement. The twist in Atonement is that the third act didn't happen, and it's been written by Bryony.
Right,
who was indirectly responsible for James McAvoy going to war. Therefore, she wants to give him a life within her novel. And just the idea, just the idea that again, it happens in Titanic. Like the idea that there's that line, he exists now only in my memory. There's always a moment where something horrible or awful has happened. However, there's a touch of hope, weird sort of hope.
Yeah. Because the end of Titanic is that sort of scene where she goes through and the Titanic's all
it's all new again. Neville starts
and he's waiting at the top of the stairs, and there's none of the sort of class bias or anything that dogged their romance in the real world.
Exactly. It's the fanciful version of what she wanted. I think the implication is that old Rose has died, and she's in heaven with Jack.
In heaven on the Titanic.
Yes. Yeah.
Terrible heaven. It's only going one way.
Well, I mean, it fades to white.
I remember me 9/11.
Yeah. Fades to white, but what happens if after that the ship just sinks again?
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah. I've got a bit more to say about Titanic later on. Apologies. I know I've talked about it already.
No.
Cameron.
No.
But that's one of my movies I want to chat about a bit more. But no, there was definitely a spate of films. It's receded a bit in the past 10 years, I think. But there was definitely, I'm thinking The Lake House. Remember that? Keanu Reeves film?
I've not actually seen that.
I've not seen a lot of these. I sort of looked them up, basically. But they all have that same trope,
It's interesting. So the divide is circumstances out of your control.
Yeah.
And circumstances sort of in your control.
But the self-destructive tendencies have made it doomed.
Yeah.
Which I think is more realistic, but less fun to watch.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to kind of experience catharsis when you're not thinking about your own demons.
Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
It's easier to watch a ship sink and that be the reason why they can't be together than it turns out he's not very nice, and it turns out that he's got a lot of things to sort out but hasn't done it in the right way, that kind of stuff.
With your nipples and obsession with My Little Pony.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Oh mate, tell me about it. Oh, God. Peppa Pig for me, but whatever.
The nipples are mine.
Yeah.
No, it is interesting that sort of distinction, and I think you're right that in the sort of, and this might sound a bit sort of wanky and pretentious, but in the eyes of the sort of mainstream audience that are going to want to sort of go to the cinema for a degree of escapism, watching things that they can relate to isn't perhaps on their agenda in terms of what they're going to enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and I think that's what I find really interesting about Past Lives, not to talk about too much, but it really walks that line really well of being sort of subtle enough to appear very ground level.
Yes,
but also there's a sort of loftiness in the way that the sort of Korean culture perceives fate and all those sorts of things.
Oh yeah, of course, which the title kind of, I didn't think it would, but it sort of weirdly alludes to.
Yeah, and I think that was quite an interesting and really sort of impactful way to interrogate those ways, and not in a way that ends up being like Notebook.
No,
the Notebook, or indeed to keep going with Ryan Gosling romance film Blue Valentine.
Blue Valentine, yeah.
But no, it is interesting. But I do find it sort of slightly strange that there is something so appealing to the doomed romance. But I guess it's always sort of been there, and I guess it's sort of, it is a great story, really.
It's one of the stories. Again, going back to Romeo and Juliet, there's something about it which really appeals to people. Maybe it's catharsis. Maybe like getting upset, as much as some people don't like to admit it, getting upset at a film can be cathartic, I think, anyway.
Yeah.
I sometimes
the cobwebs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I sort of sometimes seek out films that people have said have really upset them. I'm like, all right, let's see if it can do the same to me. And if it does, I usually watch them on my own, which is quite pathetic, really. But there we go. No, I think there's something cathartic about them and something universal about them, and it's the easiest way to get emotionally invested as well. Like if you think about trying to think of a recent other like film that I've watched in the cinema that might be a bit more difficult to get emotionally invested in. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Like, I don't know. The sprawling nature of it means it's a lot more difficult, and I don't know. For me, I love a good doomed romance film. A lot of my favourite films are kind of based on that. I mean, even something like Castaway, which is chiefly not about a doomed romance, but there's a through line there with his Chuck and Kelly, right? There's a bit at the end which should be so cheesy, but I love it so much where he's like, oh, I knew you were alive, I knew it. I love you, you're loving my life, like that kind of stuff. Disproportionate amount of doomed romances are in my kind of top 10.
Well, I think it's since the dawn of the medium, I think romance has been one of the central sort of genres that's driven its success and popularity. And there's a reason why even in mainstream blockbuster movies that aren't explicitly romance films, there are going to be romantic elements, because it's a key part of the identity of the medium, certainly in the mainstream sense. So I think it's sort of understandable that it would be the appeal is there, given that culturally the idea of love and romance is something that's existed long before the films even existed. It's sort of a nature. It's in everyone's nature to want to have a companion, right? And that's always been the case. I think I'm thinking about the ending of Endgame, which should have been the last Marvel film. They're ridiculously romantic. I mean, it's not doomed, but it's so... Do you know which bit I mean? Captain America and his missus. Oh, yeah.
And it ends with like a song from the 40s.
Oh, God, yeah.
That's the ending of what should have been the last Marvel film. And it's a romantic idea. So, the through line and the idea of romance, I agree, is just
I disagree
everywhere.
with you on the basis that we got Ant-Man and the Wasp, and that was worth it.
Well, yeah.
Quantumania,
Absolutely, the one thing Endgame was lacking, which was the quantum realm, Quantumania.
Heavens. Fucking hell. Couple of examples then. I think we should rattle through some. So go on, Ben. I have only got a couple, but I feel like this is more your wheelhouse here.
Sorry if I
No, go for it.
No,
go for it.
So my first example is, have you seen this? Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah. Long time ago, but
Yeah, I love this film so much. Star-crossed lovers, which is, again, like that's the Romeo and Juliet thing. That's very, very, very common in romantic films, is the idea that they can't be together because of like a sort of societal reason or otherwise.
It's like a rivalry, isn't it? A familial rivalry.
Yeah, that's the Romeo and Juliet. In this case, it's more a kind of society thing. Although I actually kind of think it's there. It's not necessarily like the film doesn't concern itself with other people's opinions about them two, because no one ever finds out about them two. It's like Jack and Ennis. They are. It's more about how they think people will react and how it what they found, unfortunately, doesn't fit in with the mold of the time. It starts sort of 1960s to 1980s Western America, effectively.
And I guess that's the sort of key thing there, is that it definitely does exist, even if it exists in the minds of the two lovers. The omnipresence is justified, because should that have ever been revealed, their lives would have been substantially far more difficult. Oh yeah,
completely. There's an implication at the end that Jack, who, again, spoilers for Brokeback Mountain, came out in 2004. Come on. that he's been killed because of his sexuality. It's never explicitly stated, but there's definitely kind of something there. Love the soundtrack. A staple of a really good doomed romance film I feel is Kick-Ass. Not Kick-Ass. That's the wrong phrase to use.
Yeah, Kick-Ass soundtrack.
Kick-Ass soundtrack by Gustavo Santaolalla. His score is like really, really memorable and really terrific.
Okay.
As are the lead performances as well, goes without saying.
Yeah.
Ledger and Gyllenhaal, just fantastic. Again, yeah, like I say, the reason they can't be together isn't because society won't let them. It's because they won't let themselves, which is where a lot of the tragedy ultimately stems from, and also a lot of the reasons why, one of the only reasons why they kind of disagree with each other quite a lot, Jack and Ennis. I actually don't think either of the characters are like explicitly homosexual. I kind of think that, especially in the case of Ennis, Heath Ledger's character, he's sort of more sexually attracted to men but more romantically attracted to women. I think that was the kind of vibe I got, and he's kind of attached to the idea of a wife and kids, but he's suppressing his sort of less nurtured side of his sort of sexuality. Like, there's an argument where they have, which there's that kind of famous line, "I wish I knew how to quit you," and that speaks volumes, I feel like, in the fact that their relationship is largely kind of based on sort of physical urges, and that they're almost sort of addicted to each other, despite the fact that they kind of desperately are seeking to kind of settle down at the same time. And the bit as well, like where he's like, "Fuck yeah, I've been in Mexico." Like, I don't know if you remember that, where they have an argument about like Jake Gyllenhaal's character Jack goes to Mexico to seek out sort of sex with other men because of like the way things work. He sort of it's kind of an urge that needs to be satisfied for him, whereas it's not so much for Ennis. And it's just that kind of breaks it down, like that the whole relationship starts to break down at that point, and that's where the tragedy stems from, and it culminates in Jack's death. And there's just the use of Gustavo, I can't know say his name, sorry. The use of the music at the end just really, really gets me. It's so upsetting. It's such a good, but it, like, I mean, quintessential doomed romance, you know. Really, really powerful, stayed with me. I watched it like 2005. I was far too young to watch that film. I think we had it on DVD for some reason, and I have no idea why. I kind of put it on because I heard a lot about it, and it floored me. It
was a film that, I mean, it did sort of dominate the sort of discussion. You know, there tends to be, you know, there's a few films every year that sort of have like a period of time in which they seem just to be all anyone is talking about.
Yeah,
I remember, obviously, 2005. I'd have been 15, so my memory isn't brilliant of that time, but I can remember that film being obscenely popular and being talked about a lot. Even in circles that I wouldn't have necessarily attributed upon reflection would have necessarily talked about a film of that ilk. So I think it goes to say, and Ang Lee, I mean, you know, his work with real character study, dramas, he's brilliant. He's unmatched.
And I
think certainly of the last 20, 30 years.
Oh, no, completely.
Maybe not unmatched, if there's plenty of people that do it really well as well, but I mean, I made the mistake of sort of only having considered his like American films, but his films before then, you know.
He did Sense and Sensibility, which is a kind of period drama. Well, there's a lot of romance in that as well, and that's probably where he got the chops from. And so I feel like he kind of transplanted that onto Brokeback Mountain, which is a lot. You know, and at the time as well, it wasn't like a taboo film, but it was a new idea. You know, I wouldn't classify it as like queer cinema, but it was bringing that theme into the mainstream for perhaps the first time, or at least the first time in recent years at that point. So really commendable for that reason as well. Just like really interesting and very difficult to talk about at school because I loved that, but kind of going back to what I was saying about anime, like hard to talk about Brokeback Mountain at school because everyone just called it like the gay cowboy movie. You know what I mean? And it's tough because I loved it so much. But there you go.
Well, it's funny because Ang Lee he's handled themes of a similar notion in The Wedding Banquet.
Oh right, okay,
you know, which again concerns two men, a gay couple, living in New York. I think my memory's a bit hazy of the film, the sort of details like that, but you know, it's a gay couple, and the character's from Taiwan. One of the men is from Taiwan, and he fakes a marriage to sort of please his parents.
Yes,
and again, that's that sort of cultural the cultural differences, but not in a way that's explicitly critical of either.
Yeah, no,
I think obviously in Taiwan there's a much more sort of traditional view, which is more deeply rooted and more pervasive across the culture, which is obviously a lot more negative towards homosexuality.
Yeah,
I might be wrong in saying that in the context of now.
I've no idea. I've got to be honest, but
you know, at the time, that's certainly how the film communicates that through through his anxieties,
right? Okay,
about his parents finding out his true sexuality. But even in the context of Western ideas and Western identity, whilst it might be somewhat more lapse in comparison, there is still there are some moments in the film that are really smartly peppered throughout, which suggests that this animosity is towards that way of life is still very present in everyday life, even in the West. So, it's a really interesting movie, and there's some really great bits. It's quite funny as well. It's quite a funny movie.
It sounds like there's good opportunity for some comedy there.
But it's sort of like quite downplayed. It's not sort of in the conventional doom romance sense, or the more romantic sense, I'd guess.
Yeah,
because there's obviously a wedding, in which tends to be a very, very much a staple of romantic films, and particularly romantic comedies. That's where a lot of the comedy builds towards, isn't it?
Yeah,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
No, great film, and I'd quite like to revisit Brokeback Mountain and The Wedding Banquet.
Yeah, man.
I think they pair together quite nicely.
Just
First of all, because they're from the same director.
Yeah.
But similar themes.
Completely, yeah, and lovely soundtrack as well. Very good. Very good music in all of the films, actually, that I've got on my list. Common movie theme. Go on then. What's your?
So the film I wanted to talk about briefly was In a Lonely Place by Nicholas Ray.
Okay, yeah.
Which is Humphrey Bogart, Gloria Graham. I think it's probably Humphrey Bogart's finest hour.
Oh right, okay.
I think I've mentioned this film before on this podcast. I seem to remember saying that very sentence just now, but in the context of a doom romance, I think it works perfectly, and it's particularly interesting given the sort of era in which the film is made. So it was made in 1950. Very much that sort of classic Hollywood era.
Yeah.
Maybe later stages, but it's. Obviously, the romance was, again, like we said earlier, one of the central sort of tentpole genres, and something that obviously garnered a lot of critical and commercial success for the industry for a very long time. This film sort of feels almost like an anti-romance, in the sense that the archetypal Hollywood romance, which is often, these characters riding off into the sunset to a life of sort of just, purity and endless enjoyment.
Yeah.
What sort of happens when the couple does get together,
Right, yeah.
And if particularly one of the members of this relationship is a very flawed and difficult and sometimes reprehensible human being.
Yeah, right, okay.
So Humphrey Bogart plays a down-on-his-luck screenwriter who's got a horrible temper.
Right, yeah.
Quite violent temper.
Okay.
And he ends up in I don't want to sort of spoil too much, because I really would love people to see it, so I don't want to say too much, but he ends up in a relationship with Gloria Graham's character, who's one of my favourite actresses from the era as well. So certainly lesser known compared to some of the bigger hitters, but her work is fantastic.
Yeah,
I think Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, for example. I think it's one of her first films, and she's amazing in that.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
yeah. No.
And it's about this relationship and how it blossoms initially, and how Humphrey Bogart's sort of darker elements sort of recede in the presence of love.
Right.
He sort of reins in his drinking, his violent outbursts completely sort of disappear, and he returns to his work, he returns to writing, and he loses that sort of hard-edged cynicism which you see in place so many times in that era, which he's so fucking good at as an actor. But then these things start to creep in, and there's this sort of exterior. Basically, he gets accused of murder because he's one of the last people to see this person who gets killed.
Right.
And the sort of exterior pressure from that has an impact on this sort of archetypal classic Hollywood romance.
Yeah.
And as the pressure creeps in, this sort of fantasy cracks, and Bogart starts to sort of just deteriorate back into this former self, which makes, for Gloria Graham's character, harder for her to see the innocence in and maybe think this guy could have done it, and also want to spend a life with him, because he is, he becomes very violent and aggressive towards her and towards other people, And it's just a really sort of tremendously sad movie. I mean, the ending is sort of bizarrely cathartic in the classic noir sense, but horrible in the romance sense.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
And it's in keeping with the style of the noir, which is obviously very hard-boiled and downtrodden, as a lot of them tend to be, because that's the sort of the style of the time, and thematically speaking, very much akin to the ideas of the time.
Yeah.
But it's a really brilliant film. I mean, Nicholas Ray, great sort of filmmaker of that era, made some very sensitive films about romance and about sort of gender as well.
Yeah, okay.
He made a great western, Johnny Guitar, which is a fantastic western. Subverting gender roles and having Joan Crawford as the lead. He's a really fantastic filmmaker, and I think if you're looking to sort of start that era of Hollywood, he wouldn't be a bad place to start.
That's nice. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Kind of a combination of what we were saying earlier then is the circumstances beyond your control, aka getting accused of murder, but also interweaves that sort of imperfectness about the character is another reason why their relationship would fail. And I guess the combination that's interesting, because it's usually one or the other. They're usually both perfect. And
that's true. I've not considered that in the context of this film.
Yeah.
Bogart is sensational in it. Sort of said this a few times, but he plays that hard-edged, downtrodden character so goddamn well, but here he gives it real nuance.
Yeah.
And real pathos at times as well, which I think the best sort of doomed romance films have is that, if the characters are going to be shit, you still sort of feel for them after what they've done, even if it isn't that great.
Yeah.
And that speaks to the complexity of humanity, which I think for the era, which in a time where Hollywood was predominantly about sort of fiscal success and, not wanting that complexity, that was sort of more reserved for theatre, I guess, at the time.
Yeah.
As it was a more commercial medium, it really speaks to the quality of filmmakers like Nicholas Ray that they can do these things, threading a sort of fairly conventional noir trope into a really impactful story of a doomed romance. It's a really special film, one of my top 10 ever films, actually. So,
nice. Yeah,
good, a nice opportunity to speak about it, especially in this context. I would implore anyone to watch it.
Yeah.
For many reasons.
I will give it. I've not seen it, so I will watch it.
I think I have it on Blu-ray.
Oh, on Blu-ray as well. No less.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Gotta love that transfer.
Oh, baby.
So as I mentioned earlier, I do want to mention Titanic
because
you can't not acknowledge it, really.
Huge cultural moment.
Yeah,
certainly for our generation. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, we were both very young when it came out, but
it stayed with, like, I heard of it really, really young, so it stayed with, like, you kind of in the zeitgeist for a really long time.
Yeah, it stayed with our generation the same way like Disney films of that era stayed with our generation.
Exactly.
Yeah,
completely. No, you're totally. I mean, it was the most successful film of all time for like 20 years. And it was also my introduction to the concept of tragic love as well, like the concept of star-crossed lovers. I think I got a bit of a bias towards Titanic for that reason. Like, I guess, the sheer power of using a romantic attachment that blossoms but ultimately cannot continue or is like cut short. That was the first time it was ever introduced to me as like a powerful storytelling device, So undeniable chemistry between DiCaprio and Winslet. I do, I've assessed their performances many times. I don't think they're perfect. I think it does stray into melodrama big time, but it has to really, it's like kind of... It's an epic, isn't it, in a way, isn't it? It's like a kind of sweeping epic.
Yeah. I think you could forgive it for having that, given its sort of budget and size and scope.
Yeah, kind of like Lawrence of Arabia levels of scope almost. I kind of like the idea of using the romance as a foundation for hammering home a horrendous and very preventable loss of life as well, and it was using the Romeo and Juliet thing of the two lovers from different backgrounds as means to convey that class divide, which made the Titanic sinking all the more tragic as well. Like, that kind of worked for me. Tragedy is reinforced by a great soundtrack as well. Like, James Horner, there's a bit in the end where James Horner's score really like grips my throat when Johan Gruffand, Welsh actor, he's the one who's like, is anyone alive out there?
Yeah.
He's waving like a green flare, and the soundtrack like properly gets to me at that moment. I think a lot of people immediately like kind of in their minds it clicks to Celine Dion. I actually don't like that song that much, weirdly, but I think that there's some understated moments in that score that never get talked about, and the fucking album, the soundtrack album that came out, it's not the same music, as in it's redone, like they re-recorded it, and it sounds different and weird, and I don't like it.
That's a weird thing to do.
Yeah, they redid it all and they made it more operatic than it needed to be, and
okay.
So that moment when he's waving the flare isn't in the fucking soundtrack, so I can't find it anywhere. I should probably stop swearing. But yeah, I'm very passionate about this
particular bit of
this bit of score. That is in the soundtrack, but it's too much. It doesn't get to me as much as the clip. But yeah, I had to mention Titanic. Really, I will. It'll probably be a long time before I will mention it again through fear of embarrassment, because I keep talking about it. But yeah, big moment for me anyway.
No, it's always good to hear you talk about that, man. I know you're a big fan of it.
Yeah, and I thought like I had to bring it up again in the context of this discussion, because for me that again it was just my introduction to all that and that feeling. Weirdly, my parents. I don't know if they're probably listening. You told me Jack died before he died the first time I watched it, so I kept looking out for the moment where he was going to die, and yet it still really upset me when it happened. There's something to say about his sort of carefree, high-spirited nature that when he freezes to death, it's like really heart-wrenching.
Yeah, there is something classic about it, isn't it? In the sense it's that sort of. The stuffy, hoity-toity, upper class, and that being some sort of oppressive force. I mean, that can sort of be a bit of a problematic characterization in some ways. But I think it's interesting, that obviously Winslet Rose wants to break free from that, and her way of doing that is meeting this sort of guy who's got nothing to lose, but that's part of who he is, and sort of makes him so appealing.
Yeah, and
free.
Exactly, and he transplants that nature onto her, which enables her to lead this like really wonderful life. And even like remarries and stuff, but they don't touch on it that much.
You feel really sorry for that fucking bloke she remarried.
Oh yeah.
I always think about that. There's always sort of like, I think we've sort of talked about this before, but like in romance films or anything, like as an audience, you are just conditioned just to want this thing so much that anyone else, like the guy that she remarried, is like, fuck that guy.
Yeah. Actually, Past Lives does something really interesting with that, which we'll talk about in a bit. Yeah.
A lot more balanced view of that, I think.
100%. Yeah. Really good.
No, I think it's interesting. I mean, we were talking about that. I want to sort of pick on that idea you were saying about doom romances, in the sense that their love is not allowed to blossom because of sort of some sort of societal thing, and it made me think of films like A Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and Moonlight. Two examples of two gay and lesbian in couples who, through expectations of masculinity, in the case of Moonlight, which Jenkins wrestles with so beautifully in that film. I always think, I've only seen it the once, but the scene that always stays with me is the scene of the guy showing is it Chiron how to swim. I don't know why, I think that just reminded me of, even though it was nowhere near as cinematic, I was just in Queensway Swimming Centre in Derby, but my dad doing something similar, and I was really young, and I remember that, like, just that's not to be cheesy, but that's like the power of movies, right? It hits you in a way that I think few other mediums can do. And it was, I just remember being sort of completely paralysed by that and being a blubbery mess for like 10 minutes of the film, so much so that I sort of forgot what happened after that. Really hit me. But I think that's such a delicate portrayal of the struggles, and the masculine expectation, which I think is interesting in the context of Brokeback Mountain, because that's sort of similar. I think we've mentioned this before, but the cowboy is the archetypal sort of symbol of rugged American masculinity. The masculinity that conquered the West, the masculinity that is this sort of cultural touchstone, not just for people in America, but the entire world. And like, to be gay is almost a betrayal of that. In the eyes of those characters, in the eyes of the lovers.
And that's their downfall, is their perception of what people their perception of themselves almost,
Yeah.
and they have to settle down and get married. But like, what does that do to their wives? And,
and who are they dragging into the mire to uphold that facade?
Yeah, and like when tragedy strikes as well, like they're just left with nothing. Like when they have no choice but to not be together, i.e., one of them dies or is killed. It's like it just affects me so much. Another good example, again, I'm not sure. I know you haven't seen this, and I've talked about this film before on the podcast as well. I do want to briefly talk about Call Me By Your Name.
Oh, yeah.
Just because I've made quite a lot of notes about this, actually, but like it just encapsulates the feeling of like having a crush. Do you remember like when, I don't know if you're in like early teens and you had like a crush on someone, and it would be quite a powerful feeling, even though it was kind of stupid and... it's
formative yet throwaway in equal measure.
It could be on a celebrity as well. Like, it could be on someone you'll never ever meet. Someone like 20 years older than you. It still affects you in a really sort of powerful way. And that film is a great example of that, I think. And also, like, oddly, even though it's another same-sex relationship in Call Me By Your Name, it doesn't really touch on it that much. Like, it doesn't... The only way it touches on it is like Elio, the 15-year-old Timothée Chalamet character, is sort of having a bit of an identity crisis in it, and it plays to that, like that. But it doesn't, like, society in the context of Call Me By Your Name. There's like a wonderful moment where his dad just says, "Look, I know you guys had some in there, but I'm like, just like cherish it." And it's such a lovely moment. Like, it sort of makes you realise that the film isn't about what society thinks of them at all, even though I think it's set in like the 80s in Italy. Like, it just is totally unconcerned with that, and it's just about these two. I think that's really nice. You're with this 15-year-old guy Elio the whole time, and you kind of understand through his naivety. You understand his obsession with this man, like Armie Hammer.
I was going to say, I think the film is sort of lost stock because of that.
It's a shame. It's a shame.
It always sucks when that happens.
Yeah, it makes it difficult.
I mean,
to recommend.
That's probably the sort of the worst thing to happen, really, given the context of the allegations. But for the sake of the film podcast, a film podcast. It kind of, for me anyway, like the bit at the end when. I know you haven't seen it, and I don't want to spoil that for you, actually, so I won't mention what happens at the end. But the idea of a crush, it gives you that same feeling watching the film. Really good. So that's interesting to communicate that so strongly.
Yeah.
I was thinking in the because we sort of mentioned it, portrait of a
Lady on
Fire. Yeah. I mean, that is a fucking special movie.
Yeah.
And and seeing Siamma as someone that, I mean, she's in our director deep dive pot, isn't she? And we hope to talk about her soon. So I don't want to talk about this too much for that reason.
Okay.
But that fucking ending is.
I need to revisit it. Yeah, because it's beautiful.
Just magical. Like, it's so heartbreaking, but so lovely.
So simple, without words as well.
Yeah. Which I think is something she is, as a filmmaker, one of the best at right now. Sort of communicating such an intense cocktail of emotions and feelings and stolen glances, and
completely,
for that. And one of that, and I would say that and Moonlight, examples of two great modern doom romance films, because it's the outside, the exterior stuff is always there, and it ends up being. The love can only keep that at bay for so long,
Yes, and it's always the love that you take away from the film as well. That's always despite the fact that, for whatever reason, the two leads split apart, be it through death or circumstance, it's always the love that you take away from it as well. No matter what. Same with Call Me By Your Name as well. And Brokeback Mountain and Moonlight, it just that's the powerful feeling that kind of lingers, I think, and does with Past Lives as well. I feel. Yeah,
I mean, let's get into that because.
I've just got one more really quickly.
Go on.
Have you seen it? It's called Like Crazy, which is a terrible title.
No, but I agree it's a terrible title.
Yeah. It captures sort of difficult nature of a long distance relationship. Quite well. Great soundtrack. Guy called Dustin O'Halloran. Really great chemistry between the leads. In this case, they're wrenched apart by circumstance, visa-based circumstances.
Okay.
and they have the ability to communicate still because it's set in the modern day. But I actually think in the case of Like Crazy, this is what brings the characters to the tragic, sort of semi-tragic conclusion. So they, spoiler alert, minor spoilers, they meet again at the end finally, like after this visa situation was sorted out. But because of the fact that they were able to communicate, that the idea of distance making the heart grow fonder just goes out the fucking window, and there's like a horrible awkwardness between them at the end. They're finally back together again, but something isn't the same anymore. And it's weirdly because they were afforded the ability to chat over Skype and stuff, and it's another thing
in past lives.
Past
yeah,
lives, and it does.
I think it's interesting that the idea that the technology has sort of contributed to the deprival of like romance.
It really is. Yeah,
I think that's a really interesting thought if you consider the sort of wider narrative about in so many movies of different genres. They're often very cautionary tales about technology.
Yeah,
all of the sort of luxury and apparent freedom it should offer you. There's always a sort of something incredibly dehumanizing about it.
Yeah, I think so.
And that's interesting. And I'd like, on the basis of that, I might check that out.
It's good. It's good. It's pretty. It's quite a difficult watch. Like I was in like a long distance relationship. I fucking hated doing the Skypes and stuff. Like I really used to dread it.
Yeah.
Luckily, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, right.
Married to someone else. But it did. I think if you've experienced that, Like Crazy is one to watch because it does touch on those ideas, and the idea of, like you say, technology actually being the great inhibitor to a relationship. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes.
So we've, throughout the discussion, I guess we said like in past lives.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
which is quite a happy accident. Let's go into it.
Yes.
I guess start very rather tritely. First thoughts.
I really liked it. Yeah, and I think if you asked me a week ago, I would have been a bit more mixed on it. But it really stayed with me, and it's a slow burn. Even after you finish watching it, you kind of you're considering the themes and really nice cinematography as well. Because a lot of the shots sort of stuck with me, and I kept remembering them again.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really good, quite reasonably powerful. I thought, not quite upsetting in the same way that like something like Brokeback Mountain or Call Me by Your Name would be, but it's like a subtle melancholy, like we were saying earlier about. What about you? I know you.
I mean, I remember sort of about 20 minutes into the movie thinking, I'm not sure this, because I remember thinking from the trailer, because obviously being in the watershed quite a lot before the release of the film, saw the trailer like 3 or 4 times, and I remember remarking, I don't know if I was with you or with someone else, but I sort of remarked that film could either be like seems like an awkward mix of like an indie movie, like a really impactful sort of study of romance, or a fairly familiar rom-com.
Yes.
And I'm not sure which direction this film's going to take.
Yeah.
And I felt that there was a bit of that sort of that going on in the first sort of 10, 15, 20 minutes of the film, and I thought, but as the film went on, and I felt the film grew in terms of its confidence thematically speaking, it became something really quite special, and a film that, after like a week, like I said in the intro, like after like the 4 or 5, 6, 7 days, I was still thinking about the ideas of the movie.
Definitely. And
I think it ties really interestingly into what we were saying before about the idea of things that you can't control getting in the way of true love, and things that you can getting in the way of true love. And I think it wrestles with those really interestingly, and in the context of a cultural division as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is fascinating, because we talked a few episodes ago about Return to Seoul.
I was just
and it's interesting because
it was probably that film that the trailer played against, actually. I wouldn't surprise me.
Maybe. But it's like this idea that there seems to be a sort of a revival of these sort of kinds of movies about the East and West and the differences, and And that is often used quite a lot, not explicitly East and West, but the cultural differences certainly in like more mainstream romantic films is really fucking common. Like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
And the third one that's coming out, and the trailer looks fucking wank.
Doesn't look good.
I mean, obviously it's not for me, and I completely respect that. And if you go and enjoy it, power to you. Like, I won't judge you, but even by the standards of like romance films, that trailer looks so fucking shit.
Yeah, 11% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Has it been out? Is it come and gone? Or?
The reviews have certainly come out. Yeah.
Right, 11%. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not too wrong there. Then I don't know, but that's a really common theme. That sort of cross-cultural amalgam, which is shared between the two lovers.
Yeah,
and it's just nice to see it be done in a more sort of sensitive and far more sort of impactful manner. In this film. And Return to Seoul, I think Return to Seoul, because I think those themes were a little bit more embedded in Return to Seoul than they are here. I think there's something more universal in the message of past lives, even though it is still obviously rooted in that experience, and it is a key theme in the film. I feel like there's something a bit more universal about it.
I think Return to Seoul was Return to Seoul definitely kind of, it was more overtly what that film was about, was that kind of cultural divide. This film uses it a bit more to break down the communication between those two a little bit. It uses it as a device to show the audience, hey, these two have led vastly different lives, and this is one of the few reasons why it can ultimately never really work out. And it does use it less subtly than Return to Seoul, and again, not to the same extent, but it is employed for sure.
Not to the detriment either. I think it's a central part of the film, absolutely.
But
the idea is, for those that haven't seen it, first off, what are you doing? But secondly, if you're still here, it's about the sort of classic sort of fantastical element of love, the idea of just seeing someone and feeling a connection to them that sort of supersedes any sort of rational thought.
Yes.
And that connection being a constant in your mind, even when those people aren't around.
Yeah.
And that's something that films have definitely done before, and will continue to do in various guises. But that idea, and it really burns with a sort of intensity. And it's interesting you talk about First Crush, because there's an element of that too. Because the film begins with the two. Well, I mean, there's a film with 3 lead characters, I'd say, but the sort of 2, Korean characters before Nora, which I believe is her
Western name. Yeah.
But before Nora moves to Canada, she has this kind of thing, this sort of childlike early teenage infatuation with this boy that she's really close with, and they have a really close relationship. And from the outset, it appears their relationship sort of supersedes classic sort of teen relationships. There's a closeness that is obviously deeper,
and it's also heartbreakingly innocent as well.
They're
young. They're so young that it's it flourishes. Their sort of romance, I wouldn't even call it a romance, but it's a budding romance. It's on the cusp, isn't it? So it flourishes at a stage that Nora and Hae-sung's lives, when they're still, I guess, free of any pubescent or adolescent clutter.
So
it's really pure and really sweet, and kind of reminded me of that film Close as well. That same sort of dynamic, a little bit. A friendship, which is the distinction between a friendship and a romance isn't quite as defined.
I
suppose.
No,
when
because
you're
the people
young.
aren't that defined, and their understanding of those things isn't that defined either. So, I completely agree. I'm not considering that context. Close would be another doomed romance film, really.
In a way, completely.
Tragically.
Oh, it was nasty. Yeah. I mean, nasty, but in a way that you should maybe give it a go.
Great film on Mubi, I believe.
Yes.
But and then what happens is that she emigrates with her family to Canada.
Yeah.
And they lose touch. And years and years later, Nora is at college.
She's in New York.
She? And on a whim, whilst talking to her mum, she decides to search out this boy, this lost connection, which is obviously still burning within her.
Yes. You never forget your first, I suppose, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And she finds him, because he's trying to find her.
Yeah.
And then it starts like as you mentioned with Crazy, what the film
Like Crazy. Terrible title.
Fucking dreadful title. But and they start talking over Skype, and the fires that were burning within both of them just ignite to sort of preposterous new heights and a sort of stomach churning intensity.
Yeah.
And they speak constantly to one another.
Yeah.
And then they hit. And I guess Nora sort of starts to realise that this is sort of not going to work. They're at different stages in their lives, and whatever sort of fantasy that they both have, which they both superimpose on each other, is just not going to work.
Yeah, it breaks down, doesn't it? And I think, she realises that they've already been brought up in vastly different cultures. There's like a logistical issue with how they can't see each other for a year and a half.
Yeah, because he's going to China for work, and she's going to some writer's retreat because she's a budding writer, isn't she? A playwright. Yeah. And she sort of starts to realise, I'm going to have to give up a year and a half of potentially like meeting someone and settling down, and I'm going to have to give all that up for you. And she sort of comes to that sort of horrible realisation that unless they're together in the flesh, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work for them, which is kind of heartbreaking. There's a moment when he just kind of like, it's not like we were ever dating anyway. Yeah,
and it's like, but you sort of were. It was never stated, but you completely were kind of. Yeah. But it is entirely free of like any. It's free of those sort of overtly sort of sexual themes. They're chasing that purity, I suppose, that they had when they were younger. So they never kind of consummate anything in it. I know, not that you can over Skype or, well, I don't know, but that's quite a tragic moment.
It is, and it's also from Nora's perspective, I think takes quite a great deal of strength to do that because. I think she obviously wants to keep this going, but realizes that it's so counterproductive to her own growth professionally or academically, or creatively, probably be the better way of saying it, because that's what she wants. She's a writer, and that's what she wants to do. And if she forfeited that to chase this romance, then she could, her a big huge part of herself will go.
Yeah, she'll have to give it up. It's a very almost quite an American thing that she does. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
I think there's an implication in the film. I'm not sure how true this is, but actually, this kind of gets touched on in Return to Seoul as well. That the kind of part of the Korean way of life is being very open with your emotions. And whereas what she does is she kind of closes that off to him in pursuit of a dream, like almost an American dream, right?
Right. Okay.
And he doesn't quite understand that. I think like he reacts well, like he doesn't do a Bogart, but he doesn't. Also, like he doesn't. You get the feeling he doesn't quite understand why she's pushing him away.
Yeah. But he's very gentlemanly in his acceptance of that.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then she goes off to this writer's retreat, meets a Western bloke, who has similar aspirations to her, wants to be a writer, and they fall in love. And the film, jumps in time quite a lot. If you hadn't guessed,
12 years twice.
12 years, which I think it actually plays with really quite well. And she's married this bloke. They have a nice life together. They live. In relative comfort in New York, both creatives, both get to practice their respective creativity. Yeah. Both seem very much in love. And then this chap comes back into their life.
Yes.
Via a holiday to New York. From Korea.
Yeah, he's just split up with someone, hasn't he?
That's right. Yeah.
I feel like this might be where the film demonstrates his weaknesses more so than in any other part of the film, was where it's kind of implied that the reason he's there is sort of for her, not necessarily to whisk her off her feet, but just to see her again. And it's quite, it's sort of a weakness of his that he doesn't acknowledge her circumstances. And then the final part of the film plays out in him kind of realising that things aren't as heavenly as he might seem.
I mean, as the sort of that burning emotion within you, it helps you to sort of formulate these collages of a successful relationship that you sort of superimpose on one another. And you get the sense that both characters are doing that. The idea of finding your one true person, is something that is so trite and overdone, but I really like the way the film deconstructs it, in this idea that a lot of it doesn't sort of take into account the complexities of the other person. And of course, in this film, the complexities on a basic human level are various, but not to mention the cultural differences, which again the film sort of explores quite interestingly. There's a moment in the film where Nora's talking to her husband about this, and she says, he sort of makes me feel like less Korean and more Korean at the same time. So like obviously there's an attachment to home, an attachment to her identity, which is really important to who she is. But there's also, it brings into stark relief how different they are, and how her sort of being, growing up in the West has given her a different outlook on the world, which does not correspond with his. And the film doesn't. What I love so much about that moment is that it doesn't sort of play it as some sort of really discordant clashing of ideology. No, but it's something that should they sack off both of it and go with each other in the classic romance style, they will grow and fester and become problems in the after the sort of sparkly nature of the romance declines and they're living together and all this sort of stuff. So it's always sort of implied that it's almost like sowing the seeds to sort of almost undermine the fantasy that they superimpose on one another. Well,
there's another great moment where it's the husband talking to her in bed, and he's like, if this was a story, I'd be the fucking villain. Like, I'd be the character that everyone hates, because I'm the white guy who's like kind of found you, and I'm getting in the way of your perfect love. And he's really uncomfortable with that. He's not aggressive about it, and they talk about it in a really quite sweet and healthy way. But he's kind of, the rest of the film, he's kind of acknowledging that there's a part of him that's gonna have to be that guy. And he's just got to hope to God that she doesn't like get enveloped by whatever subtle feeling she might be having. And the way he plays it is really great, and it does do a really good job of acknowledging that kind of nuance.
Yeah, because he sort of, he's handling it in a very mature and adult way, but that scene's quite interesting because it almost unmasks that, and reveals the real bubbling anxieties underneath, which I think he is more than entitled to feel. And I think it sort of speaks to the idea about the complexity in which the film handles the three characters, because on the face of it, he knows that he can't get in the way of it, because it would be villainous to do that, and it would be immature. But at the same time, the feelings that would lead to immature behaviour are still there. And I think having that scene and having that moment to talk them through with Nora was I thought quite a powerful moment. I think some people I was sat with found it quite an amusing moment, which I can sort of see because it is kind of amusing. But like, I thought it was quite interesting in that context that, we obviously put him to this standard as this character, but he's still going to be terrified about losing his true love to this sort of, who is someone that she is herself is even sort of relatively vocal about having some kind of connection with. Even though she doesn't know what it actually is herself. There's
a bit where he's sort of asked her, like, are you attracted to him? And she's like, I don't think so. So there's
he's a fucking handsome bloke, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? I remember thinking, well, he's not a bad looking bloke either, but in a more sort of stereotypical sense, he is fucking handsome.
Yeah, exactly. So it's tough, there's definitely a lot of moments in the film like that which play with the idea of the one, I guess. And what happens when, what would it take to get in the way, and what would that make that other person become? There's also some great moments between Hae Sung and the husband as well. Like, they kind of, he doesn't speak very good English, Hae Sung, and this chap is starting to learn Korean, isn't he? So there's like a language barrier which inhibits any sort of real conversation about it,
and it weirdly increases the tension.
But they're talking about that. He just keeps thanking him for like it was nice to meet you and stuff. And he's just sort of saying all these phrases which are very commonplace in the English language, and he can do nothing but return the same in Korean. And but like you say, the tension is still there, and it's kind of, they both know exactly what's going on, and they both know like kind of weirdly how it's going to end as well. But it's
the tension
crazy.
is in the simplification of that interaction, isn't it?
Exactly.
Because they're both feeling very complex emotions towards each other, and yet they can't enact that complexity because of the language barrier.
It's great.
And there's that interesting moment, I think, when Hae Sung says to the husband, we'd probably get on in a different circumstance.
Exactly.
You can tell there's like flickers of like, he's all right actually.
Exactly.
Again, that adds like an additional layer of sort of complexity to it.
Doesn't he say like, I'm annoyed how nice he is?
That's it. That's it.
It's quite sweet.
It's sweet.
I got a couple of standout scenes.
Go on.
There's a kind of theme that runs through the film about her and how she deals with her emotions. Like as a child, she like used to cry quite a lot. And then the bit at the end where she doesn't sort of burst into tears or anything. There's no kind of emotional blowout moments in this film, but right at the end when she starts crying and on her husband's shoulder, I thought that was really powerful. And just kind of demonstrates again without any words of just like the complexity of the situation and like what she must be feeling running into this guy again. And that was just a lovely moment. The past life thing as well, like there's a conversation. Yes,
I'm
that's right.
really sorry if I'm bastardising it, but I think it's Inyon, isn't it?
Yeah, just the idea that in like kind of a parallel universe, I suppose this would be like the American or Western equivalent. It's just, when people say, in another life, it's that, but a lot more, told with a lot more thought than I just did.
But I quite like the way it's deployed because it's used in two guises in the film. So the Inyon thing is used by Nora to basically pull who would ultimately be her husband. And then it's used by the sort of long lost flame as a way of trying to sort of like cushion the blow and make things less awkward between him and the bloke, but it makes it more awkward because of the way Nora's used it before. And I quite like it. It's sort of like it does away with that sort of like outside fetishization of Asian belief systems and the way and it sort of brings it in a way that we would say things like, it's fate, you know what I mean, like a throwaway remark as a way of sort of justifying behaviour or things that have happened, which I thought was a really refreshing way of doing it, because it gave it a sort of, not to trivialise it to the point it wasn't important or isn't important, but it gave it a lived-in quality, which definitely. I really liked.
That's true. I didn't think about it in that way, but it is quite, it does feel quite sort of earthy and lived in.
Yes. I just think it's such a sort of subtle and powerful ode to the things that could have been. But is bold enough to sort of acknowledge that the things that could have been are going to ultimately face their own problems. And I think that's one of the takeaways for me from the film was, even though these people are undoubtedly connected through some of this inexplicable feeling that they just feel to one another, it won't necessarily mean that they will avoid any of the problems that any other relationship will come across.
And it's quite weirdly sweet that it's left at that. It's like it's still pure then. It's kind of untainted by any kind of real world scenario. It's just something that probably for the rest of their lives they're going to think about occasionally, like maybe once or twice a week, just fleetingly, like maybe in another life, that kind of thing. But it's a great, it does demonstrates that really, really nicely.
I think it's kind of like the perfect foil to romance films in a sense, because in a way that a romance film is there, as I've said probably a few times already now, to offer like a fanciful portrayal of love and romance as a method of escapism. I think it's like a real powerful ode to the greyness and complexity of people. I might be sort of straying into sort of waters that I know very little about, but I feel that like a lot of the sort of black and white attitudes to love and romance tend to come from like that sort of black and white approaching the culture that people consume. I don't know how true that is, but I just feel that like, and I don't want to say romance films are like contributing to something that is very nice, because we all have our escapism, that's absolutely fine, but like I feel that like films like this really treat the idea of love and the doomed romance with a real sincerity and a complexity that, you know, just reminds you how complicated anything is as long as there's people involved. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And I think that's just something we need more of in sort of, because I think this film did quite well in terms of breaking out of maybe that's why the trailer was a little bit more mainstream feeling, just to try and get more people through the doors.
Yeah, I think so.
Which I don't blame them for.
No, because you're going to be surprised by it when you do watch the film, which I ultimately was. It's weird that it took a while, actually. I think I was slightly put off by the simplicity of some of it. Like, a lot of their Skype interactions, like, that went on for a long time. I was like, a lot of this dialogue is just very nice and safe and simple, but it had to be that way because it is just about two people that clearly love each other very much in one way or another, and can't be together because they've got their own stuff going on. Like, that's all it is. And it's all the film needs to be. But it just took me a week or so to get that, to digest that, and it's definitely a better film for it.
No, a really wonderful movie. A real highlight of the year, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess if we do a end of year retrospective,
that'd be quite cool, actually. Yeah, definitely.
Nicking an idea from the film angle.
yeah.
Sorry, boys.
Yeah. But yeah, no, like, I agree. Wonderful movie, and glad I saw it. Shall we outro it, or have you got some?
Let's get there.
Let's get there now.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it then. A real highlight of the year.
Definitely.
And I'd be interested to see how it sort of stacks up against the future releases of the next 3 or 4 months. 3 months left of the year.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Bloody hell. We started this in December.
January.
Yeah, January. Well, it was January, because of it was Avatar, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. On the 1st.
Yeah.
January.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. So there we go. Almost
What
a
a
year.
journey. What a journey.
Nice.
Thank you for being with us. Here we go. Yeah, it's weird. I've sort of not really reflected that it's been a whole year.
No, man. Yeah, that's crazy.
That's really sweet. It's nice.
It doesn't seem like a whole year at all, but years never do anymore.
That's true. Yeah. It's not like a couple of prattly old puffins.
Yeah.
No, great movie.
Yeah.
Please seek it out. As Ben pointed out earlier, probably will be on a more prestigious streaming platform at some point.
I tried to find it online, actually, because it was quite a long drive to the cinema, and I was like, I couldn't. It's out in America on Amazon, and I downloaded a VPN. I couldn't get it to work, so I tried to stream it illegally. And couldn't get that to work either. And I'm so glad I saw it at the cinema, because it was a really special experience.
Here we are, the power of cinema.
I know. I feel bad for that, but
to be fair, it's A24. It's not exactly they're struggling, is it?
No, I there was a moment of weakness, and I was like, let's just see if it's online. I couldn't get any of the links to work. And I was like, all right, before I download a catastrophic virus, I should probably just get in my car and go and see the film.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Next week, Old Oak.
Yes.
Old Oak. Ken Loach returning to the big screen.
It's been a while.
It has been. I mean, I'm interested with this one. I've seen a few trailers.
Yes.
Or the trailer. So the film seems to be about, poverty that's sort of gripping England, Northern England.
And how immigration sort of ties into that.
And how it's sort of the sort of anti-immigrant argument is framed as a sort of source of a lot of the economic strife that is dogging these communities. I'm not going to lie, as much as I am interested in the exploration of those themes and ideas, the trailer looked very on the nose.
Oh, mate, I'm glad you said it, actually. Yeah, it does look... It didn't look even remotely subtle.
No, which is something I think Loach hasn't really been... He hasn't really been concerned with subtlety for a while.
Yeah.
I think it's probably because he's just so furious about the state of modern Britain that he just thinks, fuck this.
Yeah.
But who knows? Let's not judge it yet.
There could be something else to it that just isn't in the trailer. I mean, people that make trailers quite often don't watch the films, so they could have picked the moments of, let's just communicate the ideas of this film as clearly as possible in every single line. Hammer it down their throats. It really is guilty of that trailer as well. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Put me off ever so slightly, if
it
I'm
did.
being honest.
Same. Yeah.
but we'll see.
Then again, it might be the same people who did the fucking trailer for Past Lives, because it almost put me off in another way.
Yeah, well, yeah, there we go.
For similar things. But that will lend itself to discussion around English social realism. A few of Ken Loach's other films. New territory for us, because it's not something we've really talked about on Send the Boys to Send Men. So looking forward to that.
Definitely, yeah.
In the meantime, enjoy this episode.
Yes.
Thank you for your support over the year. Well, it's not, the year's not over yet, but cheers.
Cheers.
Bye, mate.
Bye.
Bye.